Hi guys, today I want to talk you through the process of publishing an academic journal article, and I'm going to focus in on how we go about selecting which journals we're going to send our paper to, how we put together a list of our favourite journals where we would like it to be published, how we go about the submission process, what happens if our paper isn't accepted, what happens if we get offered a revise and resubmit, and what happens, how we should think it through if it just looks like our paper isn't going to get accepted at all. Okay, so now you've got a paper that's ready for publication, that's ready for you to submit to a journal. Where are you going to submit it? So what we're going to try and do is draw up a hit list of the journals that you would like to submit it to, and this will differ based on particular paper that you've written just there. Okay, so what factors are there to think through? First, is this a generalist paper that will apply to a general philosophical audience? Or is it a specialist paper like, a logic paper that's going to have to go to a specific logic journal? Secondly, is it a big, grand idea like a new theory, or is it quite a small point? That might affect the kind of journal you send it to and the quality, the perceived quality of the journal in kind of the rankings that people seem to have in their minds. Okay, so once you've got rough answers to those questions, start making a list. What you can use to help you out at this point is the various online rankings of journals that you'll find. There's lots of different rankings. There's the lighter rankings that I've often used. Now, journal rankings, lists of what the best journals, it's a contentious issue. Often you take a bunch of academics and you ask them which are the best journals, and then you make a list on that basis. Now, obviously that's not very scientific, not very objective, but it does tell you something. The people who will be evaluating your paper, the referees, they will have in mind a standard based on where they're refereeing for, right? If I am asked to referee a paper for Phil Review, that is probably like the number one ranked philosophy journal, I've got in my head when I'm reading the paper really top standards. I'm thinking this paper should be absolutely excellent for me to recommend, accept it. If on the other hand I'm refereeing for a paper like Synthase, let's say, it's still a good journal, but it's not absolutely top notch. So I've got recalibrated expectations in my head. I'm kind of thinking, okay, is this a good paper? Does it make a good, interesting argument that lots of philosophers are going to read? Rather than asking, is this an absolutely exceptional paper? So journal rankings do tell you something informative about the expectations that referees are likely to have. It also tells you something about how valuable to you having that publication would be in the minds of other philosophers, like the kind of people who might be making job decisions, right? So if you're applying for a research job, a lot of that will be based on what's on your CV. And it's not just the number of publications you've got, it's where they're published. So somebody who's looking at your CV and trying to decide, is this the person we want for this job opening, might look at where you've published papers, and they might have in their mind something like one of those online journal evaluation rankings type things. So if you've got papers and they're published in like Phil Review, chances are some of those people looking at your CV will go, wow, this person publishes in really good journals. If on the other hand, you've got a whole bunch of papers, but none of them tend to appear in the top, like let's say 20 journals of those online journal rankings, that's not to say that they're bad journals or that they are bad papers that you've published. It's just that the people evaluating your CV might be, I'm not sure that these are quality papers. I mean, they're not going to go and read all your papers. So you've got to factor those kind of things in mind. Online journal rankings might not be wholly objective or scientific or anything like that. They might be really problematic things, but they do tell you something both about potential referees and potential job applications. Before we go any further, I just want to jump in here and say, if you're enjoying this content and you want to help me out by supporting the channel, go and take a look at my Ko-Fi page, see what we've got there, and see ways in which you can help me out. Okay, so once you're factoring these kind of things, make a list of the journals that you're going to submit to, maybe choose 5 journals. Also factor in response times, right? Some journals take ages to get back to you, maybe a year on average. Some will get back to you in 2 months. Whether that's important to you depends on where you are in your career. Oftentimes for me right now, I'm working on lots of different things. I can send a paper off and I don't really care if I don't hear about it for a year, okay? When I was at the start of my career, I really wanted a job and I wanted a job quickly. So it was a real bonus if a journal could get back to me within 2 months. A paper might have to go around 3 or 4 or 5 journals before it gets accepted. So then there's a big difference if they all get back to you within 2 or 3 or 4 months versus getting back to you within 6 months to a year. I mean, no way would I want it to take 5 years for my first paper to get published. That's just holding up the point at which you get your job. So you've got your list of where you want to submit your paper. You're just going to go through and you're going to submit to the first one, checking the requirements as you go. So they might want you to format it in a certain way or whatever. Often they don't care about how you format it when you submit. It's just it has to be formatted in the right way if they accept it. But some places are fussy. It's a pain, but if they say to submit to us, you have to do a certain thing, you've got to do it, otherwise they'll reject it. Okay, so you've submitted your paper, you're going to wait for a bit. If they accept it, great. Doesn't often happen. The most common outcomes are going to be either they reject it, in which case it's got to go to another journal, or they give you the option of a revise and resubmit. Okay, in this case, they will explicitly say you've got the option to resubmit, but we want you to take these comments into account. Okay, so you might have 1 or 2 or 3 referees' comments sent back to you, and your job then, if you want to resubmit it, and I guess you do, is you've got to look at those comments and revise the paper in light of them. Okay, how are you going to do that? Well, it's a similar process to when you sent out your paper or you gave talks and you got a bunch of comments back. You have to sift through them and work out which ones will actually improve the paper and which ones just feel like tangents, okay? So I'm not going to say you should revise the paper in light of every single little comment. I mean, after all, some of them might just be, crazy wild speculations. Some of them might be misunderstandings. Now, if they're misunderstanding, you don't really want to go into it in a lot of detail, but you want to avoid that misunderstanding. So you might want to include a small clarification. On the other hand, if one is a big objection to what you're trying to do, then you might need to go into it in a bit more detail. And in fact, in that case, you might have to go away and think through the project, think through your idea for a couple of weeks or months. You might have to include a whole extra section in the paper addressing that kind of comment. You might have to change what the theory that you're developing says in light of that comment. It can get really quite involved. When you resubmit to the same journal, if you've been offered a revise and resubmit, what you're going to do is you're going to send them the revised paper and you want to mark up changes in the paper. So you might write in blue any changes that you've made to it in the text of the paper. And also you're going to want to include a separate document, which is your response directly to the referee. So what I would do in that case is say, okay, referee 1, list out the points or the comments, the objections that referee 1 raised, and you respond to each one in turn. And then do the same for referee 2, and if there's any more, do it like that. And you're really doing 2 things there. One is you're responding to the point. So if they've objected to your theory, you might be saying, here's how my theory gets around that point. But secondly, you're saying how you've changed the paper in light of that. So typically you might be saying, okay, referee 1 objected that blah, blah, blah. In response, here's how my theory gets around that objection. I've included an extra paragraph in section 5 explaining this response. Okay, that's a standard way of doing it. But it's not the only way. You might be sort of saying, oh, that's an interesting point. Here's how I would get around that point. But look, I'm not going to discuss this in the paper because I think it would be a big tangent. So I've just added a footnote or I've just added a little clarification, but I'm not going to go into that in the paper because I think it would take the paper too far off course, or it would, expand the word count too much or whatever. So you've got a few options in the way that you respond to the referees. What I would make sure you do is you respond to all the points that they've raised in the response to referees because, they've put effort into thinking this stuff through. It's kind of a bit disrespectful just to ignore them, but that doesn't mean you have to include every point that they've made in the actual paper that you're resubmitting. Often referees say stuff that you find hurtful, upsetting, you get angry. If you're feeling like that, just put it all down and come back to it another day, because in your response to referees, you want to be upbeat. You don't want to be too aggressive and combative. However much the referees might have misunderstood what you're doing or upset you or whatever, they've put their time into reviewing your paper for free. Right? It's not something they have to do. They volunteered to do this, and you want to be thankful for that, or at least you want to appear thankful for that, however you actually feel about what they've said. How you actually go about this whole process at the end of the day does change as you go through your career, right? I found this in my own case. At the start of my career, it was like, I really, really want this paper published. If I've got a revise and resubmit option, that means it's one step closer to being published. I will do everything I can to get this past the gatekeepers, like past the referees and the editors, even if that means changing the paper quite considerably, and even if that means expanding the paper and making it kind of more full of twists and turns and stuff I didn't want to talk about in the first place. It was just really important that I got the thing published. Nowadays, at my stage in my career, I'm a bit less focused on, I must get this paper published in this particular journal really quickly. What I tend to want to do is write a paper that I'm proud of. So sometimes a referee will bring up a point and I kind of go, yeah, okay, that's a reasonable point. I could say this, I could say that, but I'm just not going to change the paper because I think the paper reads well as it is. It's the right length, and I just don't want to talk about that in the paper. I think talking about it will worsen the paper, and if that ultimately means you don't want to take the paper, whatever, I'll send it somewhere else. I'm a little bit more blasé in responding to referees, but I've got more confidence in my own judgment of what is a good paper. I'm more confident that I can judge that than back when I was just starting out. Okay, so let's talk about what happens if you sent your paper to your first choice place, they say no. Your second choice place, they say no. Your third choice place, they say no. And you're going down your list, one journal at a time. That's really important. Just one journal at a time. But they all say no. What do? Should you have a never give up attitude or something else? Well, I think it really depends on your confidence in the paper, the kind of what you want out of this publication, and the kind of career stage that you're at. The first thing to do is look at the comments that you've got. Look back over this process. You're going to have a lot of comments from a lot of different referees. Are they kind of saying, look, you're nearly there. You're getting revise and resubmit, but it's not quite getting over the line? Well, yeah, in that case, keep going with it because, likely you're going to get there in the end. If, on the other hand, all of the comments are really saying or hinting you're a long way away, then there might be very little point in just keep bashing away with sending it out there. Maybe you have to take a step back, leave it for a bit, maybe give the paper a big rewrite, maybe even develop that idea a bit further before you think about sending it out again. One of the factors that is going to impact on that decision is where you are at your career stage. If you are at the end of your PhD and you haven't got a job lined up and you really want one, it's really important that you get that paper published soon, I guess. So you've got to keep going in that process. Unless the comments are really hinting this is miles away from publication, I would say keep going. On the other hand, if you're further on in your career and you've got a job already and you've got lots of valuable projects that you could be getting on with, maybe you don't really want to keep bashing away at this one, right? Maybe it's a case of, yeah, I could revise this paper, I could change it completely, but maybe it's just not that valuable to me. Maybe my time would be better used in working on this other project, which is ultimately going to be more important to me. There is so much more to say about writing and publishing an academic journal article. I haven't really talked much here about the actual writing process, what that should look like, the kind of things you want to go and think through. So if you want to hear a bit more about that, go and take a look at this video over here. Thanks to all my Ko-Fi supporters for making this content possible. Thanks to you for watching this far. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you back here on Attic Philosophy soon.